So, Jeff, you are the president and CEO of Asthma Canada, but you have a really long, lengthy career that has sort of spanned a number of different organizations in the nonprofit sector. So prior to Asthma Canada, you worked for, I think, close to a decade at Cystic Fibrosis Canada. You held multiple roles there, including chief executive director, co-chief executive officer, and then chief corporate services and strategic initiatives. You are a board member at the Women's Brain Health Initiative and a past chair of the Federated Health Charities. You've been an executive director at Willow Breast and Hereditary Cancer Support, and you've held several other leadership positions in the nonprofit sector. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today. Really looking forward to delving into some of your thoughts and experiences just with the nonprofit sector in general, but also with how you kind of view and interact with communications on a daily basis.
It's my pleasure, Eric. I'm glad to do it. And after just listening to that intro, I guess you could say I've earned the gray hairs that I have in my beard through many years of work in the nonprofit sector. So I'm happy to share whatever insight I can provide for you and your students.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So thanks again. I guess maybe just to start out, I gave a bit of an intro, but if you could just share a little bit about your current organization, Asthma Canada, and a little bit about your current role.
Sure. So Asthma Canada is a national health charity. So we're a registered charitable organization. Our mission, which I think is fairly obvious, is to help people living with asthma live better lives. So we do that through education, advocacy, and support. So we provide credible, evidence-based information that is reliable, that people can count on. We live in this age of Dr. Google, if you will. It's the first thing people do is Googling, symptoms and when they're diagnosed with something. But we want to be that source, that go-to source for people, whether it's patients, caregivers, parents of a child with asthma, for example, media. We're often called on to provide those types of patient perspectives. That's our education part of our mission. On the advocacy front, we advocate for new treatment options, for the best possible healthcare for people living with asthma and other lung health and respiratory health conditions. For example, right now we're doing some advocacy work in Ontario around the need for more respiratory educator positions within primary care. Primary care is an issue. A lot of people don't have family doctors. So we're advocating to make sure that people are able to get the proper education, care, make sure they're using their medication properly, that they understand their disease and they know how they can control it. Because the good thing about asthma is for the vast majority of patients, it is a disease that can be controlled if it's properly diagnosed and properly treated, and if people continue on the medication and asthma management plan that they put together. So that is a realistic goal for people, which is unlike other diseases. You mentioned the fact that I was with cystic fibrosis for so many years, which is of course a disease that is genetic, that for some people is life shortening. We are living in a very good era for the cystic fibrosis community. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but there's more hope than ever. But the fact is, it's not just a disease that you can fairly easily control, whereas asthma can be, but most people don't have their asthma under control. And that's what a big part of our mission is, to advocate for them and themselves, for them to advocate for themselves. And then the third part of our mission is around research. So we raise money, we fund asthma research in Canada. We also are actively engaged in research, both in terms of the community engagement piece of it. So we will recruit patients, we'll work with investigators who are looking for patients from the asthma community or a certain subset, someone, for example, with severe asthma or mild to moderate asthma, and so forth. And we also, our team itself is also engaged. We do research ourselves. I think this year, right now, we're on about the third study that I'm an author on, that are published studies that we work with investigators on, and sometimes with the pharmaceutical industry on as well. So those are our three buckets. And what we do, like other health charities, if you think about Cystic Fibrosis Canada, Heart and Stroke Foundation, et cetera, we're here to really lift up and provide support ultimately to help people live better lives. In terms of my career, so this really wasn't what I set out to do with my life. If I think back to when I was in school, my objective at that time was really to become a psychologist, either a clinical psychologist or a research experimental psychologist. I started working while I was in my undergrad program at the University of Windsor with a nonprofit organization, and ultimately was introduced to some of the leaders at the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, the CNIB, which opened up some opportunities for me to get involved in a research program that I ended up using as a thesis project later on, and also running some of their programs really in their children's service and youth service providing element of how they were structured at that time. So we were working with parents of kids that were born with blindness and visual impairments. We were working with young people who were looking at training them to help them end up in the workforce and opening up career opportunities for them. I really, once I got there, it was like I was hooked, right? Like I started doing this work, started working with these families, started working with some incredible colleagues, and it just, my career trajectory really changed at that time. And without me really knowing it, I was kind of putting myself on that path to work with mostly health, but other community type charitable organizations and causes. So I did that program-based work for a while. I ended up in Toronto with Youth Assisting Youth, which is a peer mentoring program where I was the fundraising coordinator. So I kind of shifted away from program work and got more involved in behind the scenes in terms of raising funds for a charity. That gave me an opportunity to delve into the overall management and governance, working with the board. And from there, I worked with the Arthritis Society back in Southwestern Ontario, where I'm from, which was really a community engagement and community fundraising based role. I landed after that, kind of unexpectedly, with the Victorian Order of Nurses, the VON Canada, which is one of the largest providers of home care and community support services in at that time across Canada. Now they're Ontario and Nova Scotia based, but I ended up as the executive director of their branch in Windsor, Ontario, where my hometown. And it was, I say unexpected because it was a very unique situation. And one of the things that I want to encourage the students that you work with to think about is to always be open to opportunities as they open themselves. And I find, that's a lesson that I've learned in the nonprofit sector. I'm sure if you talk to somebody who's worked in the for-profit, corporate sector, small business, whatever the case may be, they would probably tell you the same thing. It's really keep yourself open to opportunities. So I had a chance to really step into a role that I didn't quite feel that I was prepared for. But the branch at the time had been through a really tumultuous period where they lost a contract for home care services. They had to lay off about 300 employees. It was a bit of a messy situation financially and even PR wise in the community. A lot of anger and just not a good situation. But what it did was it created this opportunity because I was somebody younger, fresh, not from the nursing the community background, and they thought, let's bring this guy in to put a new face to VON and really revitalize the charitable programs like Meals on Wheels and things like that. So I did that, and it turned out to be, I would say, probably the best choice in my career in terms of taking that leap. The board that hired me obviously took a leap of faith in me, and I did with them as well. And we worked together. I had a really good small team. We were able to rebuild the branch there, and I ended up staying with VON for over 10 years. Then, as you mentioned, with Willow, which was a cancer support organization, then Cystic Fibrosis Canada, which was also one of the most amazing experiences, and I'd say the second longest tenure of any of the organizations I've been with. And I was fortunate to be there during some really incredible times for the CF patient community in the organization in Canada and across the world. And then about 2 years ago, coming up on my second anniversary of being the CEO of Asthma Canada, where I work with Asthma Canada is a smaller organization than CF Canada, even though we have a huge patient population to work with, but we're really focused, dynamic, incredible staff team, and a fantastic board of directors and some great volunteers that are really doing some wonderful work. So I'm very privileged to work with this organization now, and I really have had an amazing career. working with all these organizations. Unexpectedly, again, that wasn't what I set out to do, but I have zero regrets in terms of what I've done and what I'm doing now.
That's so interesting. I think I'm just reflecting. I think I've probably known you maybe even close to 2 decades now, and I didn't know that backstory about your sort of early ambitions and how you got into the nonprofit sector. And I think that's really important, because one of the things that I share with my students all the time, many of them, this is a postgraduate course that I teach. Most of the courses I teach are in postgraduate programs, so many of them have career experience in other industries, or they're coming from different countries where they've got experience doing other things. And I talk about the importance of, just life experience in general, and taking the time to really find your way and find your passion. And I feel like increasingly now we don't see people that just go directly into their career of choice. It takes them some time, and their career trajectory tends to be anything but linear. So I think it's interesting to hear from someone who is very accomplished and has been in many leadership roles in their respective industry, say that they went through that same experience. And certainly I think as you mentioned, that's really a positive and not a negative in your eyes.
Absolutely. And the other thing too to keep in mind is there are so many more opportunities around education and the nonprofit sector rather as a career option. When I started in it, it was, and I'm sure if you talk to people of my vintage, a lot of them will say in a way, we kind of fell into what we were doing, right? We didn't necessarily seek it out. Whereas now I find, there are programs if you're interested in fundraising for nonprofit organizations. There are postgraduate programs that are specifically taught on those types of career options, and even within fundraising, it's a huge, broad part of the operations of a nonprofit. So if you're really passionate about events, or if you're really passionate about working with people and want to work with larger major gift donors, there are programs that you can take advantage of that will help prepare you for those opportunities. I did complete a nonprofit management certificate program through St. Clair College in Windsor and the United Way. At the time, they had a joint program. I have a leadership program in postgrad certificate from the University of Windsor, Leadership Windsor Essex, which was a great program. So those were things that I did as a postgrad, right? So there are lots of great opportunities out there, and I think it's something that I would encourage people to explore. And again, go back to what I was saying is really to keep those options open, to have an open mind. Oftentimes, landing a job I mean, I've only ever worked in the nonprofit sector, really, but I think in any industry, a lot of it is about the timing and the fit, right? So if we posted today, if we were hiring somebody, let's say, to work in fundraising for our organization, we'd have all kinds of applicants that have oftentimes similar experience, similar educational background, volunteer work, things like that. But what the hardest part for us is to determine, is this person a good fit for us at the time in terms of what we need, what our team is trying to do? And I think that's one thing that I've been very fortunate, is to be able to find those opportunities and really align myself with a cause, with an organization that needed me as much as I needed them in a job, right? So that's something to always keep in mind as well when you're looking at these opportunities. Is they're not organizations can be quite different, and it's really sometimes it takes a while to find that niche, if you will, but you will find it if you follow your passion and really go about it strategically.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and I think that's great advice. And I definitely want to come back to that conversation about finding that right fit, finding that corporate culture that fits your personality, and the job search process in general. But before we get to that, I want to just touch a little bit on communication. So obviously, the courses that I teach generally focus on public relations, communications. And when I look at the three buckets that you mentioned earlier in the conversation, so education, advocacy, research, to me, it's very clear how communications plays a big role in all three of those buckets. Wondering if you can speak a little bit about the importance of communications in general in the nonprofit sector, broadly, just in general, in terms of several of the organizations where you've worked, but then also how you and your team at Asthma Canada currently are leveraging communications and public relations in some of your efforts.
Communications is absolutely central to every one of those mission areas that you just relayed again. And really, it's the key for us, because nonprofit organizations are built on relationships. And if you don't have good communications with your stakeholders, those relationships are very difficult to develop. So when we talk about nonprofit communications, I would say in some ways it's even more challenging than for-profit organizations. I think we have limited resources. We have a need to balance the community. In our case, we work with a patient community. Other nonprofits perhaps work with people who are unhoused or people who are experiencing mental health issues and so forth. In our case, with the asthma patient community, we're constantly trying to balance their needs along with the advocacy priorities that we've developed, which would be in alignment with the broader patient needs, but not always with the needs of every individual patient. So it can be challenging. We have to be very diplomatic about how we do that. We have to demonstrate impact. We're under a lot of pressure and a lot of scrutiny as a charitable organization, because we're relying on public money. We don't get a lot of government funding. We do have government funding for a program that we're running right now on immunization awareness for people with asthma and lung health conditions. But by and large, we rely on corporate sponsors, corporate donations, and individual donors across the country. So again, that goes back to the relationship and the trust that we have to have with those funders and with those donors. And if you don't have strong, transparent communications in everything that you're doing, those relationships will not be sustained. And so for us, it's really central to all of our mission and our credibility as an organization to have really strong communications programs. So the current team that I'm with Asthma Canada is relatively small. We have 6 employees in our Toronto-based office, and then we have some certified respiratory educators who are the patient-facing resources. So we have a helpline that people can call in or email, and those questions and connections are made by those certified respiratory educators. But in our office, team is very close. We have a person who's focused on fundraising, primarily on development, and we have a communication specialist. And so part of my job is to make sure that those two are working together very closely, along with our director of programs and services, to be really seamless in terms of how we run our communications, and are constantly thinking and being very deliberate about being strategic in how we align those messages. If you have, and I've seen this with some bigger organizations where you have a communications team that's focused on one set of key messages, and they're really trying to drive home something around a mission priority, advocacy, let's say, for example, and then you have a fundraising or development team on the other hand that is pushing something else. What you end up doing is having these competing internal interests, and it sort of cannibalizes the efforts of the organization. So making sure that we're very deliberate, that we're transparent in what we're doing. As I mentioned, trust is key. Donors do not give to an organization, and funders, corporate funders and so forth, will not provide funding to organizations that they don't have a trust-based relationship with. So it's key. It's also about really showcasing the impact of what we do as an organization. There are, by last count, I think about 87 or 88,000 registered charities in Canada. And so when you think about it, we're all competing against each other for those donor dollars. Now, not every donor is going to be interested in the same things, but even within the lung health space, there's other lung health-based organizations. There are hospitals that are providing programs that are treating people living with asthma and other lung health conditions. So as much as we are partners with those in our program sense, we are competing for fundraising dollars. So we have to show impact. We have to continuously engage with our donors. And we also have to do the same with our community. The patient community is one that's really the heart of who we are and what we do. So we want to make sure that we have strong, transparent, open, continuous engagement communication programs so that we can really build a sense of loyalty and a sense of value. So if somebody is signing up to be part of our community, receiving newsletters and other updates and following us on social media and so forth, we want them to feel like they have a relationship with us and that they can count on us when they need something. So if they have a specific question, if we're advocating for a new type of medication that may end up benefiting them, that we're there to provide that advocacy, that service, that information, whatever it is that they need at that time. So without transparent communication, it's really difficult to build that community. The last thing I'll say is just in terms of one of the things that I think we've become more and more conscious of in the sector, especially with digital, and I'm sure we'll talk more about digital communications a bit later, but really making sure that the engagement is personalized. So there was a time, let's say with social media, for example, where we might just post something on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, whatever, and just kind of put it out there and organically, hope people read it, see it, like it, share it, whatever. And those days are behind us. I would say, we are very strategic. We're very deliberate about which platforms we're using for what messages. We're also really getting better, I would say, as an organization, and I think across the sector at tailoring communications so that we can segment audiences. So if we know somebody is living with severe asthma, really struggling on a day-to-day basis, we're sending them information and resources that are more tailored to their situation, whereas somebody who newly diagnosed with mild asthma, where their asthma doesn't have a huge impact on their daily life. So those are some of the things that we try to keep in mind and how we structure ourselves to make sure that our communications programs are really effective.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think the idea and the notion of like segmentation and really, being super clear on who your stakeholders are and how they differ from each other, and then tailoring, specific tactics, specific communication strategies for each one of those segments. I think that is something we talk a lot about. And it's really interesting to hear you kind of give your take on that as well. The other thing that I think is really interesting to me is we talk a lot about the realities of working in a constrained environment, and certainly it sounds like your team, 6 individuals, you've got one individual that focuses on communications within your team. Talk to me a little bit about some of the challenges with having such a small team. I assume that when it comes to communications, it's almost like that falls on every member of the organization. The burden is kind of organizational. Not doesn't just lie with that one individual to manage all communications efforts. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. I think, across even we have one of our staff members her role is really purely administrative in nature. She's the one that receives when we get donations through a mail campaign. She issues the tax receipts. She contacts donors if their credit cards expired, all those sorts of things. But because she is speaking directly or indirectly with primarily donors, but potentially others in the patient community, she has to be key involved in those key messages as well. So we try to make sure we include the entire team, that we're very transparent about that. That also extends beyond the staff to our board of directors as well. So every nonprofit organization is governed by it, and I report directly to a volunteer board of directors. The boards typically, like in our case, we have committees, and we have one of our committees is called fundraising, marketing, and communications. Jam those things together because they're so intertwined. But all of those, the board members, the staff, any of our other key volunteers, if we have advocacy volunteers that are going out carrying messages, you're right. They're absolutely, everyone in the organization has a role to play. And I think that just makes it even more important to make sure that our messages are aligned, that people understand them. We want to make sure that people are not just memorizing key messages, but really being able to deliver them in a way that's impactful depending on what their role might be.
Yeah, and again, I think it's so interesting. You talked a little bit about the board of the directors. You talked about volunteers, and I know kind of in our relationship, we got to know each other pretty closely during your time at Cystic Fibrosis Canada. Myself being a CF patient, also doing a lot of advocacy work myself with CF Canada. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how organizations, obviously like CF Canada, but just in general in the nonprofit space, how they or maybe how they sort of prioritize building these relationships with their stakeholders, so with volunteers, with their patient communities, et cetera, to almost empower them to become advocates and spokespeople for your brand, right? So you're almost leveraging them to do that storytelling for you. What is that process like, and does that process can you talk about the value that you get as a brand out of that process?
The value, I would say, is really immeasurable and essential to what we do. At the end of the day, it's about people, right? So in a cause like with Asthma Canada, with Cystic Fibrosis Canada, it's about the patients, the people that are affected by that disease and how it has an impact on their lives. So being able to share those stories, to tell their stories, is incredibly important. And it's really, when you think about it, whether we're talking about fundraising, advocacy, any of the work that we do, if we didn't have real stories, real people behind them, how many people would actually pay attention and be engaged and involved in our organization, or wanting to donate or send a letter to their MPP about an issue or whatever we're asking them to do? So the stories, I've that's one of the things that I've enjoyed the most about the work that I've done in the sector, is being able to work with people like yourself. And I would say that if we weren't, even if we weren't just talking together right now, but just being able to work with the patient communities that I have, and the volunteers and the advocates and people who are so passionate and engaged. I think about, obviously people like yourself, like Doug Summerhays, who was the founder, the first president of Cystic Fibrosis Canada, and his wife Donna, who they're in their 90s, and I still keep in touch with them from time to time. But it's people like that it's just been incredible in terms of being able to not just personally get to know them, but be able to help them tell those stories and to leverage those stories so that people can really understand why it's important to pay attention to those messages. So those storytelling is really a key function for communications in nonprofit, and it really puts a face to everything we do. If you think about it, even from an advocacy perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we're doing some advocacy work right now in Ontario to try to convince the government to invest in more resources at the primary care level, more respiratory educator resources. And so one of the things that we try to do when we're meeting with government officials, if it's somebody who's an elected official or if it's somebody behind the scenes working in one of the ministries, is to either have someone with us or be able to share those patient stories as well. Because even the most hardened government official, bureaucrat, working behind the scenes and crunching numbers, at the end of the day, you have to present them with something that absolutely makes sense. That is, for example, maybe saving. If you're investing here, you might be able to save on the back end of the healthcare system, that sort of thing. But if it doesn't have some kind of a compelling story with some kind of an emotional element to it, it really doesn't rise to the top. That's what people remember. So going back to the time when I first joined the team at Cystic Fibrosis Canada, first met you and others, we were really focused on ensuring that these new drugs that were coming, these CF modulator drugs that were coming, which opened up a whole new world of treatment, life-saving, life-expanding, life-improving treatments, that we could make sure those patient stories were central to convince the government that they needed to help us with this. Those drugs are extremely expensive. Some of the drugs we use in asthma treatment, like biologic drugs for severe asthma, have completely changed the lives of people whose asthma was untreatable up until the last decade or so. Those are expensive, right? So if you have to, if it wasn't for the patient stories, for yourself and young people like Maddie Vanstone, who literally went down to Queen's Park with her whole grade 8 class about 10 years ago, and spoke passionately and shared her story and why it was important to give her a chance at life. And it's just, that sort of thing, that the whole realm of storytelling is extremely important in many, many ways. I can't overstate that at all.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we talk about on an ongoing basis, right? And it's this notion of, at the end of the day, when you talk about communications and you talk about everything, from a strategic level, a tactical level, you talk about a brand's mission, but at the end of the day, what you're doing is storytelling. And I think that, as you reiterated, the power of one individual's story and how they share that and then can sort of, evoke an emotional reaction in someone, that just can't be any more valuable, especially in situations like you mentioned with CF Canada, when you're dealing with individuals like government officials who are likely hearing from many different organizations and many different patient populations. It's that personal storytelling narrative that can really make the difference. Yeah. Yeah.
It's essential. Absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to just touch on, and I'm mindful of our time here, but I think this is an important development that I think is worth a few moments. We talked about digital transformation. You talked about social media, but I'm curious about how your team is maybe not even adopting, but how you view AI in general, right? Especially as an organization that is resource constrained. You've got a small team. I know myself, working in a for-profit industry in finance, we are looking every day at how AI can help us be more productive, have a meaningful impact on what we're doing, but it comes with its own challenges as well, right? In terms of, like you mentioned, losing that personal touch in terms of your storytelling. So I'm curious how, your team views AI and if you're leveraging it, if you're using it. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I would say, it's a rapidly developing scene. It feels like it just was here and then it just exploded over the last couple of years. It's something I would say we're approaching with caution. Of course, we want to make sure really the foundation of our organization, that trust that I talked about earlier, is extremely important. So we would never do something that could potentially jeopardize that or compromise that trust. So, for example, when it comes to AI, you can replicate anything using AI these days, but we want to make sure that what we have out there in the public domain and within our website and our other types of materials that we put out is credible, and that we're always trying to make sure that it links back to us and the organization. So that's part of it, is really figuring out kind of behind the scenes, how does that happen? If you go into some sort of an AI tool online and you want to learn about asthma, we want to make sure that the information that whatever that tool is populating is up to date, current, credible, all those things. So that's part of it behind the scenes. As far as us proactively using it, we use it from time to time to help us. For example, if I have something I need to write, I'm writing a story, I'm writing a letter to someone, I will typically use it as a way to maybe say something differently, to find, it just as an enhancement. But I always caution our team, and our director of programs and services does as well, that we can't rely on those things. So it kind of has its obvious cadence. If you read something, I've gotten to the point now where I can think, oh, that person, I think they were using Chat GPT for this, right? So we just want to make sure that we're very careful about how we do it, but taking advantage of what those options might be is something that I think everyone needs to do now. It's part of how we operate as a nonprofit and within the sector. As far as the patient interaction part of it, we're not doing anything that is really AI driven at this point. Now, we are working with one of our global partners on a chat bot that we're looking to introduce hopefully this year. But it's not generative AI. It's contained within our website. So much like, if you go to Bell Canada, Rogers, something like that, and you see the little assistant, hi, I'm Jeff, I'm your assistant. It's sort of that type of thing where it'll direct people to different parts of the website. How can I help you? I was just diagnosed with asthma, or I have a 4-year-old child who's starting school and has severe asthma. And then it would kind of direct someone to information on our website. And also, in many cases, the call to action would be, you should email or call our certified respiratory educator team, and they can help you with more personalized information. So that's something that's coming for us. I think it's just a matter of time before we get that technology in place. But I think you'll see a lot more of that happening within the nonprofit sector as well. And it is there with, with some organizations as we speak. I think it also as a research tool in a way, and I don't mean, ethic board approved scientific research, but more, if we're looking to perhaps develop a partnership with a company that we haven't worked with, a corporation that we haven't worked with, maybe are understanding more about what a pharmaceutical company's pipeline might look like, what sort of interests they may have in the respiratory field. AI can be a great tool to use to help you get information quickly, and that sort of thing. I think I would approve, in terms of us using it. Obviously, when it comes to developing a patient resource or anything that's patient or community facing, we would use it with great caution and never rely on it beyond the expertise of the individuals that we work with. I mentioned earlier that we have a board of directors, volunteer board. We also have a group, an incredible group of doctors and from a multidisciplinary healthcare professionals and researchers who are part of a medical and scientific advisory board that we work with. So whenever we're putting together patient materials or offering a webinar on some certain topic, it's those people that we count on to help make sure, because I'm not a doctor, none of my staff team are healthcare professionals, but we rely on the expertise that we have within our organization. So I would always go to that, especially if we did have something that we had learned through some sort of an AI application, just to make sure that everything is verified before we ever share anything with the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting how you talk about that, and I really think that you and the way that your organization is using AI, it really aligns with how I see other organizations using it, even in the for-profit space, right? It's about understanding the challenges, the constraints, but also understanding the opportunities and how you can use it as another tool in your toolbox. Understanding where those limitations lie and where you need to sort of ensure that you are protecting yourself against some of those limitations, but also realizing that you can use it to be more productive. You can use it to do those more administrative tasks, but that at the end of the day, you need to understand the tool and be able to make those decisions, right? And I think the buzz term I hear now is, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to someone who knows how to use AI, right? And that really is, I think, something that you touch on there in your remarks. Just in the last few minutes here, kind of the last question. A lot of students, obviously, I'm sure will be very interested to hear your thoughts on this kind of topic, but everybody that I am teaching now and that I have taught, they're very focused, laser focused on kind of landing that first career opportunity. And certainly, I think they would be very curious to hear your thoughts on, best practices, how they can go about doing that, and what you look for when you are hiring someone for, let's call it kind of that entry level position, someone who might not have a ton of industry experience. What advice would you give to those folks?
So I think, the first piece of advice I would give is that, again, I go back to what I said, being open to different types of opportunities. So really using, as you said, every tool in your toolbox, if you will, to try to understand what opportunities might be out there. We have these incredible networking capabilities now through LinkedIn, for example, where, that's how you reached out to me to ask me if I would do this for you today, right? So it's there not only in terms of a way for us to connect with people we already know, but it's such an incredible, powerful tool to understand. I mean, from a job posting perspective, but also connections. So if you're interested, you see a job posted somewhere, and you see that you may have a connection there through another past experience, or someone who you were a student with, or something like that. It's great to be able to leverage those to really. Sometimes those connections can be helpful in terms of putting in a good word, a plug for someone, but also just understanding the company, the culture. It's so important now that people understand that workplaces within the nonprofit sector, as well as any sector, can be quite different, and the type of environment is not certain types of environment are not for everyone. So I'll give you an example. In the in our case with Asthma Canada, we have a hybrid environment. So we work primarily in the office Tuesdays and Thursdays, although sometimes I'm in there 3 or 4 days a week, sometimes just Tuesday and Thursday, but we try and make sure it's really mandatory that the staff come in on Tuesday and Thursday, because I find it's essential, and they appreciate it too, to have those face-to-face communications. So when we have meetings, when we're sitting down together, we can get a lot more done. Tools like MS Teams and Zoom are great, and I'm so glad we have them, but they don't replace that face-to-face interaction. However, there are some people, especially in the post-pandemic world that we live in now, who don't want to come into an office, don't want to commute, don't want to get on the subway, fight traffic, all those things. But you have to understand that if you're interested in working for Asthma Canada as an organization, we're not going to give you a job that's completely remote. So it's, that sounds really obvious, but I think it's something that you can learn a lot about before you even bother to apply somewhere. It's really understanding, really trying to understand as much as you can about the organization. I also think it's extremely important in nonprofit organizations, because regardless, if you're in a public facing role in communications and fundraising, or working with those teams, you have to align yourself with a cause that you can believe in, that you're passionate about. So there's some great work that's done in, let's say, for example, the arts sector. I respect that. I enjoy it as a consumer. I'm not passionate about the arts. I can't imagine that that's something that I would be comfortable and passionate about working in day out, talking to donors about building those relationships. My charge, I guess, or my passion comes from more health-based causes. That's not for everyone. So really understanding, what is it that you're passionate about? Because when you think about it, if you can align your passion with your job, with what you do for a living, how much better could it be than that, right? So that's something I can say that I do. At the end of the day, even the worst day that I might have is still, I as I'm coming home, or as I'm walking upstairs from where I am now in my house up to the kitchen or whatever, I can still say, you know what, this was not a great day, but everything I did was done ultimately to help someone and to advance the cause that we represent. So that is really something that fuels a lot of us in the sector. As far as what we're looking for, especially if we're looking for someone that doesn't have a lot of experience, or sort of an entry level type position, is really there's sort of the baseline of qualification. So if we're expecting somebody has certain educational qualifications, or a level of experience, or volunteer work, that sort of thing that could be applied, those are the baselines. And then beyond that, it's the hardest thing to do is really figure out what the fit is. And I've had some hires that I love to brag about. I have others that I thought of, absolutely this person's going to be a great fit, and it didn't work out for whatever reason. So even though you may have candidates who are relatively equal in terms of their experience and their qualifications or their educational background, at the end of the day, it really comes down to fit and what their role is with the team, and how they can work with the team that we have in place, especially with a small organization. You can't, if you're in a big company or big nonprofit, there are hundreds of people working in that organization. Sometimes there are people that you might hire that have a very specific skill that you need, but they don't necessarily align with all the values of the organization. Whereas what I lead with now, especially now when we're hiring, is the values of Asthma Canada. So, if you're not somebody who can live by those values and be comfortable with them and be passionate about them, then regardless of what your role is in the organization, because we are relatively small, that fit's not going to be there. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And that's what people like me who are hiring are looking for, is that ultimately we want to understand not just can that person do the job, but can they really fit and be a contributing member of our team, because we do totally rely on each other. we were fortunate, and sometimes timing is everything, right? So we hired a communications specialist for our team coming up on a year ago, and we put the posting out through LinkedIn, through Charity Village, which is a great source for job seeking. Through sometimes a fundraising job, it's the Association of Fundraising Professionals. There are those sorts of sources that are really catered to the nonprofit sector. We had put out the posting. We had some interesting candidates. One of them was a young man who had worked with the Irish Heart Foundation, but before that, when he was living in Ireland, before he came to Canada, he worked for the Asthma Society of Ireland. So of course that caught our interest, because that's like our sister organization in Ireland. And so we had him come in for an interview, and I sometimes joke about this. It was like he just dropped in from heaven. Like he just came into our office, and it's like, wow, this is perfect. The fit is there, in terms of his personality, his passion, his work ethic, all those things we look at. And he's done this exact job basically with another organization, not just in the health charity sector, but with an asthma charity. So it was perfect. Now, does it always align? Absolutely not. But sometimes those, you have to be open to those things. So he came here with some friends to have a different experience, to live abroad while you're young, do these things, and landed a job that he was very comfortable coming in. And so it's been an interesting experience working with him, because the basics of communication are the same. The media is quite different. So my understanding from learning from him is that it's a lot easier to get earned media, free media type opportunities in Ireland than it is here. It's become very hard to do. And a lot of it's pay to play type stuff now. So it's been a bit of a learning experience, but he also brings his learning and what he's done. So the other thing I'll add to that is just that volunteer experience does count as well. So both in terms of as a candidate, we do look at that. We do take it seriously. Some of the people who contribute the most to my organization or Cystic Fibrosis Canada, any of the ones that I've worked with, are volunteers, people who are board members, subject matter experts, patients who are sharing their story to help us with fundraising, with advocacy. So those kinds of experiences are extremely important, both in terms of the hiring process, but also just as you're thinking about your career and where you want to go, look for opportunities. Most organizations, nonprofits, are always looking for volunteers. And so if you can align yourself with either the organization that you hope to land a job with, or any organization that's related to that particular goal that you have in mind, that will help at the end of the day. That will get you somewhere. And very early in my career, even before career, I did have an opportunity to do some volunteer work with the Arthritis Society. I lived in a small town. My father was the head of the door-to-door. They used to go door-to-door looking for donations every September. And when I was a teenager, he handed me a clipboard and said, go out and canvass on our street. And I said, no, I'm not doing it. He said, yes, you are. And because he was my dad, I did it, but I hated it. But at the end of the day, I think about it, that was kind of my first foray into fundraising for sure, and working in the nonprofit sector. So just, immerse yourself in those kinds of volunteer roles as well. We're always looking for people who have something to contribute to our organization.
Yeah, that's so well put. And I think the last point on volunteer opportunities, that aligns so well with some of the discussions that we've had in class. And again, a lot of these students are going to be graduating in a year or in, several months. And we talk about a lot. How can you take that 8 months or that year and ensure that you are in a great spot to apply for that role that you want? And one of the ways you can do that is by ensuring you are volunteering regularly. You're building relationships. You are thinking about the skills that you lack and ensuring that you work on those over the next several months. And so I think that's really great advice. And it's interesting to hear how that really plays itself out in your own role and in some of your hiring decisions. So thank you for sharing that.
No problem. I think just one more thing on that is, I don't know if your program has formal internship opportunities with it, but that's so important too, because it gives you, like, that is something that we would take seriously when we're considering a candidate, but it also helps you develop relationships and connections too. So I couldn't tell you how many times I have been as a matter of fact, I literally got an email or a LinkedIn message yesterday from somebody who was one of the interns I worked with at Cystic Fibrosis Canada many years ago, who's looking to move to a different position, asking if I would be a reference for her. So those kind of connections and the experience you get from being an intern, it's fantastic. And sometimes we'll hire some of the people that I could name by name that you would know from CF Canada were interns that came to us through the Humber fundraising management program or something like that. So it's those opportunities. Don't see them as just a course requirement, something you have to do. Like really try to leverage it, try to land something with an organization that is aligned with what you ultimately want to do, and use every opportunity to gain experience and make connections, because those will help you for sure.
Yeah, such great advice. No, couldn't agree more. And I know even myself, looking back on my career, that internship, that first internship that I got, that was really the sort of jumping off point that led to all the success that I've had since then in my career. So truly such a valuable experience. And for those students that don't have access to an internship, I do think that you can find ways to build that experience, like you said, through volunteering and just by relationship building and curating those opportunities on your own. So yeah, really great advice.
And
Well, Jeff,
are,
thank you.
and
Oh,
we're
sorry, go
short
ahead.
on just
Yeah.
one
Yeah, no,
little thing
absolutely.
about sometimes finding volunteer opportunities can be a challenge, because we're not as good as about posting or putting formal job descriptions out as we probably should be. But there are organizations like in Toronto, there's Volunteer Toronto. I think there are similar organizations across most major cities, through United Way, through like umbrella groups like that. Volunteer Canada is another one, where organizations are always posting or sharing opportunities. So if you don't have an obvious path or a connection that you want to explore, if you just want to kind of see what's there, sometimes going to an organization like that can be helpful too.
Yeah, great advice, great advice. And that's one thing, again, talking about where you can find those opportunities. And, at the end of the day, I think it requires a little bit of initiative. It requires a little bit of research on behalf of the student, but the payoff is immense, right? So it's definitely something that is well worth their time. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I know you are an extremely busy guy. You've got lots going on. So I really, really appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to chat with us and just to share some of your insights and experience. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you might want to add that we didn't touch on?
I just want to say that it's so great to have this opportunity. I really appreciate it, because I think part of my role, especially as I get on in the latter stages of my career, is to make sure that we have succession planning as top of mind. We want to make sure we have a good pipeline of talented individuals coming into the sector, and looking at career opportunities in the nonprofit sector. So anything I can do to support that, I'm very happy to do it. And it's always a pleasure speaking with you personally as well. I'm glad to do it, and please don't hesitate to call on me anytime.
Likewise, always great to catch up with you as well, Jeff. And again, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure the students will all feel the same way as well. So thank you.
You're most welcome.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again, and have a fantastic rest of your day. And we'll talk soon.